Hi everybody, this is Brad Kelly. This is my Module 4 policy interview. So far the only person I've got a response from has been our building principal here at Hayes High. So I'm going to go ahead and do it with this, and then if I do hear back from our superintendent or board member, I might add some stuff to this at a later date. The first question I came up with here is, in your opinion, what policy here in our school or district is most commonly used or referred to? Here at Hayes High, anyway, our principal spoke about the attendance policy is the one that's most commonly used here at Hayes High. That there's always, students missing for certain reasons, and when you get to a certain amount of unexcused absences and things like that, then there's a process that you have to go through where students can actually be expelled or things like that. And we also have some school policy regarding like makeup work and stuff like that for students that miss due to an unexcused reason. The second question I came up with, one that I was really interested in seeing what the answer was going to be, is what role he thought politics plays in policy making. And basically he answered that every community has its certain sacred items and taboos and things that they kind of hold dear to their heart, and that politics definitely do play a certain role. For instance, here in Hayes, some of our community is more focused on the private school here in town, and then we also have supporters of the public school system here. And then to even throw something else in on that too, with Fort Hays State University, there's always political groups or certain groups that want to push one agenda or the other, and he said most of the time that even though there are those factions within our community here, that most of the time all three of those entities, that being public schools, private schools, and then Fort Hays, tend to work together pretty well for the most part. But just like anything else, there are going to be differences of opinion on how things should be ran. He said every once in a while those things do come across, but nothing that happens too frequently. The next question came up with was, out of all the stakeholders that a school encompasses, is there more weight given to certain opinions than others? His answer was that it must be legal and ethical, but again, culture of a community dictates a lot of how the stakeholders will expect decisions to make. Basically saying that outside interest groups, most stakeholders share common values, and they share kind of a common interest in the school and in the district as a whole. So like I said, policy, it does have to be legal and ethical and doing the right thing for the good of the whole, or for the majority of the people associated with the district. Next question I came up with here is, how much interest in general do you get from teachers or community members to be involved in policy development? And basically our building administrator, our principal here, talked about the fact that it kind of depends. It depends on what the policy is about. Obviously, if it affects a certain group of people, whether it's teachers or community members or taxpayers, then you're going to get a lot of interest from that particular group. If the policy itself, whether you're talking maybe about attendance policy or any policy that might seem unrelevant to certain people, then you're not going to get very much feedback from those groups regardless. But definitely, for instance, here in Hayes, we just had a build fast project go through here that's going to use some taxpayer money to finally get it all paid off with. It's like $130,000 or something along those lines. There was quite a bit of interest in that, and like I said, as far as policy, school dances, which I'm going to talk about right here, there has been some interest from that, or in that policy. through community members that have, or at least parents that have kids that go here, just because it does affect them and it does affect their families and their kids. Another question, once a policy is developed and implemented, is it reviewed on an annual basis, or is it just reviewed if need be? Basically, a lot of the building policies are reviewed on a year-to-year basis. There's always changes that are being made to our student, faculty, and administrator handbooks, whether you're talking about, tardy policy or attendance policy or what have you. There's always some things that might be changed, and if they're not, they're at least reviewed to make sure that no changes need to be made. As far as district policies or long-range policies, procedures, he said most of the time those policies are reviewed either when a law changes or at the end of every cycle, depending on which comes first. Next question I asked was, is the only ways to enforce policy through some sort of formal sanctions? Usually with policy you think of students getting in trouble or people being punished, somehow for breaking policy. And obviously for attendance, that is one of the main ways to enforce like attendance policy is through suspensions and things like that. But eventually, once those policies take root and people, students, teachers, administrators really start to learn those policies, hopefully they kind of generate a culture, and most people that the policy directly affects then buy in to that policy, and you really don't have those formal sanctions anymore. It's just part of the culture of the building or of the district. And he used the example of like the no smoking bans in public places. Probably right at the beginning there were some punishments and some fines and things like that were given out, but over time it just kind of becomes part of the culture, and therefore you really don't have issues with it anymore. Another question I asked here was, with school dance policy here at Hayes High, a year ago or so, there was a no grinding policy that was put in place, and there was a lot of I guess interest, I guess is the best way to maybe put that, with this dance policy. So I asked them about it. Just what are some of the issues that you've kind of faced over the past year with the policy? Is it, are students conforming? Are parents, starting to support it? Is attendance at school dances down? Things like that. And his answer was simply that, there's some students that still want to push the issue, but overall most kids have kind of conformed, and it's a legal issue. I mean, there's when you got large groups of kids dancing, and he kind of described it as like in a mob mentality. Sometimes you can have bullying, sexual harassment issues that come about because of it, and you can't compromise those. You have to ensure the safety of all the students that attend these school dances, and you can't really compromise that. And if you don't stick by your guns and stay strict with this policy, then he really didn't feel that you could keep your job as an administrator. If there is a policy like this and then you don't stick with it, stick by it. Another question, are there any weaknesses or current policy within our district that you think need to be revised? This is kind of my ha-ha moment, so to speak, because he really didn't get into anything specific with this one, but he said that they did adopt a new administrative handbook this year, and he said that there were a lot of issues that needed to be tweaked or maybe changed in that administrative handbook. But you could tell that there was probably something that he wanted to mention, or that there was something specific that he was thinking about, but he didn't really want to go into it in too great a detail with that. Next question, what's the ultimate measure of a policy's effectiveness? He basically said, kind of one of the previous questions I asked him, he talked about policy becoming more part of culture than it is, people really thinking about it and thinking about the punishments. And he mentioned that was probably, in his mind, the ultimate measure of a policy's effectiveness if the policy doesn't need to exist anymore. That culture has changed enough to where it's just became the norm of the society or the school building, and you really don't need to have it written down anymore, that it's just accepted by everyone. And my last question here, my 10th question, in your opinion, the #1 criteria to keep in mind when creating a policy is, and he talked about like discipline issues, attendance, discipline. Those are probably the two main policies at our school, or the most popular, I guess, policies that have to be referred to anyway. And he talked about when applying like discipline consequences to students, for violating tardies or attendance or behavior or whatever, that you really have to take in mind a couple things. You have to take in the frequency of the infraction, and this is all based on like an individual student. How often are they breaking the rules or the policies of the building. And then the second thing he mentioned that you really need to take into consideration is what's best for the educational process or the institution. Is it necessary to suspend people, or would it be better to have them in class? And you got to take into effect the students, and you have to take into account the teacher itself and how it affects each one. There's been stories about students that haven't been able to go to graduation because, especially in Northwest Kansas, you have a lot of kids that hunt and farm and stuff like that. And, I've heard of stories where kids went hunting on the weekend, and they left a gun in their car, and it was in the parking lot, and they got expelled and weren't allowed to graduate, or at least attend their graduation and things like that. And he just mentioned that you got to take into account all those things and do what's best for the school itself, and what's best for the student, and what's best for the faculty and the administrators involved. So that was my interview. Like I said, if I hear back from our superintendent or a school board member, I might add a few things to this. Thanks.